السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله, alhamdulillah, والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Dear brothers and sisters, dear viewers, welcome to this special program that we have tonight. We titled this program Safe and Sound, how to keep our teens and our children safe. This is going to be a discussion with our dear guest, Dr. Nadeem Shafi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him. On tips for parents, for teens and parents, on staying safe during the summertime. Those of you who follow our khutbahs and our sermons, you know that around this time of the year, I usually talk about the importance of parents being very vigilant. Unfortunately, I've been too many times to ICUs where children sustained serious injuries, life-threatening injuries, and in some of these cases, unfortunately, they didn't make it. So instead of just sitting around, I like to talk about different topics that benefit our community members, especially parents, on how to stay vigilant and what to prepare for and what to look out for. So alhamdulillah, we are here joined by a professional, someone who's well qualified. And tonight we chose to talk about some of these issues regarding physical safety that parents or families face during the summertime. Welcome to the program.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khairan, Shafi, for thinking of me to speak on this topic.
You're welcome. So, what is it that you do?
I'm a pediatric ICU physician, and I work at Lebanon Children's Hospital in the pediatric ICU there.
So you've seen cases, where some of these issues or occur. So you've dealt with it firsthand, and you've seen it. You've seen the kinds of injuries that I'm talking about. If I was to ask you, what would be like the top 4 or 5 dangers that parents should be aware of? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of our children. What would be the 5 top types of injuries or that children may sustain during summertime?
Yeah, there are a few types of injuries that tend to occur more commonly in the summer. And those are types of injuries that we should be aware of, parents can be aware of, because there are lots of things that can be done to prevent them. And so those types of injuries are things like submersion injuries, which we commonly call drownings.
Yes.
Alternate vehicular types of injuries, such as ATV accidents.
Especially here in the South, right?
Especially here in the South.
Yeah. Okay.
Gun safety, while that is an issue year-round, it can be particularly so in the summer. And then things like heat exhaustion and heat stroke are things that can be paid or should be paid particular attention to.
Yeah, and we're having a serious heat wave, right?
Yes.
It's extremely hot. Yesterday was hotter than today. The day before was hotter, but it's expected to even get worse before it gets better. One of the things that I share with the community is this is the month of June, July, and August. Statistically, are unfortunately the deadliest period of the year for teens and for children. I guess a factor is that they're out of school, right? So they're on the street more. So they're basically exposed to more dangers, and they may engage in risky behavior. So if we were to take one of these, tell us what, what are the actual dangers or issues that could occur. For instance, let's say drowning, right? And how can parents prevent or be more cautious so that they would prevent serious injuries?
Yeah. So drownings are a great place to start, because the summertime, late spring through summer, early fall are the times where most folks are out swimming. You'll be surprised to know that most drownings actually occur in environments that seem to be highly supervised, and that are often within familiar environments, such as home pools, as opposed to places like lakes or streams or the ocean at the beach and so forth. And so these are places that are close to home, where the amount of vigilance that is necessary is sometimes not met, even though many parents think that they're providing quite a bit of observation. There are several things that can be done to protect children from drownings. The home pool environment is one that should be paid particular attention to. And so there are mechanical preventive measures, and then there are behavioral preventive measures. If we look at mechanical preventive measures, then the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that every home swimming pool be surrounded by, at the very least, a fence.
So it should be gated, basically.
If not a wall.
Okay.
Of at least 4 feet of height.
Okay.
With a gate that self-closes and self-locks.
Okay.
And with a latch that's out of the range of a child's ability to reach.
Okay.
So that is just a very obvious but important mechanical barrier to preventing drownings. An example of behavioral is oftentimes folks will get together to participate and to go swimming and so forth. But there should be one person that is dedicated to observing children at the pool at all times.
Okay.
And it's very easy for...
So someone who is not actually in the pool swimming and having fun, because you can easily be distracted. I remember there are cases where actually, the parents or the older sibling may have been around, but they themselves were really, having fun, and they were distracted. And
or engaged in play, or running in and out of the house to get food or things like that.
Okay. So you need someone who's dedicated, who is at the pool the whole time while there are children inside the pool swimming.
That's right. Or that are using the pool. They can even be outside of the pool.
Okay.
They can even be outside of the wall.
Yes.
That's there. But if there's any possibility for the pool to be used, or the prospect of being used, then there should be someone dedicated to just watching the children.
Okay. Somehow, sometimes people say things like, "Oh yeah, all my children swim. They're very good swimmers. They're trained and stuff like that." Yet I personally, this is again personal. I don't know. Tell me if I'm just being too. If it's too much, I think even if for adults or for someone who is a good swimmer, right? It always helps to have someone else with you. Like when you're swimming by yourself, anything could go wrong. You could pass out. You could have muscle cramps. You could have anything could go wrong. So it's preferred. As I said, I know professional swimmers that somehow, in the middle of their swim, they lost their ability to continue and they couldn't make it. So it's always better to have someone with you, right? At all times, even if is that too much? Am I?
No, I don't think that's too much at all. In fact, one of the scenarios that is
especially if it's deep, right? Especially if it's deep, if you can't stand there.
Yeah. Absolutely. But one of the situations that goes unrecognized as being a high-risk environment. So in the summertime, people go on vacations, they stay at hotels, they're using pools that are at the hotel, and many of those pools do not have security guards on duty. And so if there's not a parent that is completely dedicated to observing children at the pool, then those children could go unsupervised for long periods of time. We live in a very distracted world now. A parent can even be at the bedside reading a book, having headphones on, listening to an audio book, or looking on their phone, and not see a child begin to drown. Most parents think that a child who's drowning will flail, make noise, and so forth. In fact, it's the opposite. If it's a young child, a drowning is a very silent death. Most often, especially for a young child, that child will not be heard. And so that's why the direct observation is key.
Let me ask you a question. How long does it take, on
Hmm.
average, for someone to,
Yeah.
if they're fully submerged, if they're fully underwater, before they completely lose ability to breathe or focus, or
Yeah.
even, kick or move?
So I get asked this question a lot, and um, it depends on what you have in mind when you ask how long does it take to what.
Okay.
Because even within a few minutes, a child can swallow enough water or aspirate enough water into her lungs that she may develop very severe lung disease and end up in an ICU on a ventilator.
Okay.
That's an outcome that's not a death, but that's a critically ill child that could die. Most people, when they ask the question, they're thinking about severe brain injury.
Yes.
In general, the textbooks say that your brain can go 8 minutes without oxygen before it starts to become injured. But there's a difference between severe injury and subtle injury, and even subtle injuries can change
Can be devastating,
the
yes.
life of a child.
True. True. Do you know, on an average, if someone is not supervised, how long it takes, let's say, an infant or a toddler to really end up in the bottom of the swimming pool, statistically speaking?
Yeah, so there have been studies that have looked at drowning scenarios in toddlers and young children. And most often, parents report that the child was out of their sight for 5 minutes or less. Toddlers and young children are curious beings, and it's very easy for them to slip out simply because they're curious, and be out of sight of a parent. So in fact, one of the guidance that's provided for parents, because in these scenarios of drowning, seconds matter. Seconds prevent further injury. If you have a pool or close to a body of water and you can't find your child, the first place you should look is the body of water, is the pool. And if they're not there, then spend time looking elsewhere.
Okay, that's very important tip. So if there's a nearby body of water, swimming pool, water pond, anything, even sometimes water fountains that are deep, first place that you should check, we're told here by Dr. Nadeem, is that body of water. Make sure that your child is nowhere around it or in it, and if that's the case, then you look somewhere else, inshallah ta'ala. So now, we talked about the mechanical preventive measures. Now, you said they're behavioral. You mentioned also having someone who's dedicated. What about tips, that we can share with families or parents, that they can share as, let's say, general rules, for using swimming pools? And we know in public places, swimming pools usually have these warning signs, and they have rules. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't jump, you can't dive, unless, So do you have any set of, let's say, what are the ABCs, or of, not the ABCs, but, the essential rules or etiquette of using a swimming pool, even if it's at home, in order to avoid or prevent any serious injury?
So a point to make before I list a few things. Drowning is not the only type of injury that can occur around a pool.
Yes.
And so children can slip on the side of a pool because of the water that's there. Their heads can land on the side of the pool. They can slip into the water and their heads can land. There are diving injuries that can occur. And so those are all other possibilities to keep in mind.
Okay.
With those in mind, starting, a lot of these get covered by dedicated supervision. And on that point, by the way, it's very difficult for an adult to be able to continually supervise one child or a group of children for an extended period of time.
Yes.
So the recommendation is actually limit your supervision time to 15 minutes, and then switch out with someone if you can.
Else, okay.
Which is a behavioral modification that we don't often think about. But then the types of things that you see posted are in fact very applicable. So limiting the amount of play that goes on the side of pools. pools, making sure that diving and jumping in the pool behavior is safe, making sure that there are flotation devices that are available
in case.
And then an important thing which we probably don't have enough of in the Muslim community or in the general public is a general knowledge of how to perform CPR. Immediate bystander CPR is very, very effective at preventing subsequent injury. And so I would really encourage parents of young children. This applies not just for pool safety, but for other medical scenarios as well. God forbid that anyone has to go through that. But learn basic CPR as it would apply to a child. And if there's someone that's available to do that, that can come in very handy.
That's nice. Yeah, alhamdulillah, of course, we live in a community where we have a lot of medical professionals, but not every single family has a medical, professional or practitioner available to them. But one of the programs that we did here at MIC is we had a CPR and first aid crash course or workshop.
That's wonderful.
Unfortunately, the turnout wasn't that great. So again, I urge the community and other communities, because this is being watched throughout, nationally. I would encourage centers and community centers and active members of these community centers to really hold these kind of programs for the community members, where they can actually learn how to do basic CPR and first aid programs. I think they're very helpful. Jazakallah khair for mentioning that. That is really, really critical and key. One last question about swimming pools.
Sure.
Okay. Now, is there when it comes to diving? Because that's if you tell the children not to dive or not to jump into the water, you're just ruining their fun, right? But the depth of the swimming pool is something to be taken into consideration, right? It's a factor. So before you jump, how deep does the water have to be? Because as you said, I know people who jumped into shallow water,
right? And
unfortunately, that wasn't enough. There wasn't enough distance to prevent them hitting the bottom of the pool. Right. And some ended up having facial injury. Some lost their teeth. But the worst kind of injury is something that really affects the spine.
That's right.
Right? So how deep does the water have to be before a person who knows how to swim is able to jump?
Yeah, so
if they're just jumping from the side of the swimming pool, not from a jumping board, obviously, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the loose number that I've heard is 2 to 3 body lengths.
Okay.
But a more general rule to be able to follow is just no head first diving on the shallow end of the pool. Any head first diving, limit to the deep end of the pool.
Okay.
And then parents, it's very hard to ask a child to think about how they're jumping in the pool in the heat of their play.
Yes.
But nevertheless, if they can learn, if they can be taught the safety ramifications, at least have an impression of it, and then encouraged to jump in the pool, just don't go head first if you're jumping in on the shallow side. That will make a big difference.
Okay. Because there are also techniques as to how you're supposed to jump, because sometimes it's the way you jump, because the water itself can be really painful, right? It can be the surface itself can cause serious injury if the person hits it right in the wrong angle. So also teaching them proper technique would be again, it's important that we invest into bringing maybe someone who trains them how to swim and how to have fun safely. Okay, so pool safety, we talked about that. What do you think is the other most common summertime activity that could cause serious injury and that parents need to be really vigilant about and pay attention to?
Yeah, I think heat-related illnesses and injuries are really worth talking about, especially because although school is out, there are older children that are engaged in summer sports, certainly in summer play. There are folks that are traveling, but then life your life's activities don't change, and parents with young children there are things that they need to be aware of. In the last month, I believe in the last month, there was an infant who died because he was left in the car in Memphis. That happens 30 to 40 times a year across the country. And it's very easy to underestimate how hot a car can become and how quickly. Some parents think, and
especially for infants.
Especially for infants,
Or,
but really for
any person.
For any person who cannot be able to get out of the car themselves.
Okay. Now, describe that, because I tell my children, it's too hot. When I get out of the car, get out of the car. Don't be distracted, even if you're reading a book or you are on a device, right? Because sometimes they are so distracted, right? They're so into whatever they're doing, activity, that they just stay there,
Right.
What happens when someone or when a child is stuck inside a closed car that is not, obviously, there's no AC working, the car is just in this kind of heat?
Yeah. So the risk is primarily for those children of those ages that they cannot get out of the car themselves.
Okay.
If an older child is engaged in an activity in the car and has become absent-minded, they will realize that they're starting
At some
to feel
point, yes,
that
it's
they're
gonna
starting
get
to
to
feel sick, and if they can get out of the car, they will.
Okay.
But in essence, what begins to happen for a child is that, and this is true for an adult also, is that their body's temperature continues to rise. Because there's no ventilation and because the ambient environment is extremely hot, there's no way for the body's regulatory system to reduce that temperature.
Okay.
And it continues to rise. As it continues to do so, normal body processes start to break down. And that can result in older children or adults, things like fainting.
Okay.
But in younger children, that can result in things like seizures, and then other organs becoming affected in their function. And all of those are, once that starts happening, it's a difficult process to reverse, even in the ICU, and can often lead to death if it gets that far.
Okay. Now, one thing that really gets on my nerves, and I've seen this, unfortunately, within our communities, I've seen this way too many times. Parents, especially mothers who are in a hurry to pick up something from the grocery store or from the the market, the halal shop and stuff like that, and they go there. Sometimes they keep the car running, sometimes they don't keep the car running because they think it's going to be very quick, and then they get distracted. And again, I hope that doesn't offend anyone, but I've seen this happen too many times. And very often, they're actually parked in the wrong place anyways. Either in the handicap, or they're double parked, or they're parked somewhere where the business owner doesn't appreciate them parking there. And I think it's ethically problematic, but we can talk about that some other time. My concern is with the safety, right? Keeping a car running with a child, a toddler, or someone that can actually access the steering wheel and can access, versus, turning the car off because they think it's quick and it's safer, and it's just still cold, right? Because the AC was running, and I'm just going in for five minutes to grab something real quick. I'm just missing one or two ingredients for the lunch, and it's going to be a quick thing. And sometimes I see people going in and then taking much longer than they anticipated because they ran into their best friend or someone that had just come back from vacation, and they're talking. So how long does it take? Well, I guess I asked too many questions. One, is running car with the AC on safe?
So, again, if it's going to be a short period of time, then a running car is safe. However, leaving a toddler unsupervised during that time is in itself unsafe.
Yes.
Because even in the car, there are several scenarios that can happen to a toddler that can cause injury. It doesn't have to be a heat-related injury. So I would just categorically advise against leaving a toddler unattended in the car, regardless of the circumstances.
Okay. So they're better off taking the child out of the car seat if they're in a car seat. Take them with you, right? Better safe than sorry.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Mothers, it's a lot of work to do and get them in and out of a car seat.
But it's the safest.
But it's the safer thing.
It's a safer thing to do, the more responsible thing to do. Okay. Now, with regards to a vehicle that is turned off, it was cold and everything, then it's turned off, and it's just going to be a 5-minute quick, trip into the store, and then I'm going to come out. How long does it take for the temperature in this kind of heat that we're experiencing nowadays to drop from, let's say, 66 or 64 or 68, whatever the...
Yeah. So let me give you some numbers that I encountered, and I'm going to take some very modest numbers. What goes underappreciated is that cars trap heat. So a car that's sitting in the sun
By design.
by design, because of how the heat enters, how sunlight enters the car, and there's no ventilation for it. A car that's sitting in the sun when it's 72 degrees out can become 117 degrees inside in an hour. 80% of that happens in the first 30 minutes.
Wow.
80% of that happens in the first 30
And,
minutes.
okay, so in the outside temperature is 70 what?
72 degrees.
72 degrees. It can rise, the inside temperature can rise up to 117
117 degrees.
within an hour.
Yes.
80% of that happens. I'm just repeating this so that everyone, 80% of that happens within the first 30 minutes. Okay.
So you can see that the rate of rise of temperature.
So imagine when it's 98 like it was yesterday or 99, right? Imagine what may happen. Okay.
That's exactly right. And so I think that underscores how dangerous even short periods of time can be, because a majority of the temperature rise is happening in the early. And that's a time period in which a child can already become placed at very serious risk.
Okay. In addition to the fact that there are also legal ramifications to this kind of behavior.
Yes. In fact, in the state of Tennessee, I believe there's a law that no child can be left unattended in a car.
Okay.
So there's
So again, once again, brothers and sisters, and especially mothers, please be vigilant, pay attention to this. The responsible thing to do is not to leave your child unsupervised by an adult, not an older sibling, because sometimes they're like, oh, I left the 6-year-old with the toddler or with the infant. No, make sure that it's an adult present there if you're going to leave them, and make sure that the car is running if you're going to leave them in the car. Otherwise, the safest thing to do is to actually take your child with you into the grocery store and not leave them in the car. Again, as I said, I have seen that way too many times in our community. I've seen that in different places happening, grocery store, at Kroger's, and it's really unfortunate to have to really, to see that is in and of itself is very disturbing. Imagine that really leading to some serious injury, and the potential is always there. Jazakallah khair. Okay, now, other heat-related injuries?
Yeah. So the types of injuries we've talked about so far are categorized as non-exertional.
Okay.
But older children as well as teens, young adults who may be engaged in sports, can experience what's called exertional heat-related injuries.
Especially if they're doing some summer camp, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so it's really important for parents to pay attention to their older children, but teens and adults to pay attention to how they're feeling as they're engaged in activity in a very hot environment, such as the types of days that we've been having. Early clues can be their skin starting to feel cool rather than hot. Okay. They're starting to feel lightheaded or short of breath. And then later signs can be dizziness, nausea, vomiting.
So how do you prevent that?
It starts with hydration.
Hydration, okay.
And so ideally, if a child or a teen is going to be, they know they're going to have practice. They know they're going to be playing. Prehydrate. Prehydrate as much as you can. Secondly, it's important to, if you're starting to feel symptoms, to take yourself away from that environment. Get cooled down.
Okay.
It's hard to leave. Moving into a shaded area.
Especially if you're very competitive, sometimes it's very hard to leave. But if you feel exhaustion, or if you feel, then quit. Like stop or pause and go hydrate and.
Yes, and get your body temperature cool.
Okay.
That can be, as a first step moving into the shade. But as a better step is getting into an air-conditioned environment and just allowing your body to recover and your temperature to recover.
Okay. I think before we run out of time, I really want to get to some of the other activities that could be very risky, right? And you happen to mention something that seems to be very common here for us in the South, right? Especially with people having ranches or, land
Yeah.
where which is, it's an activity that a lot of people really are envious of us for, because we have that. It's a lot of fun, but
and I don't know. I think you may be thinking of one of two things: either riding ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, or using guns and hunting. I'm not sure which of the two
I'm
it
thinking
was.
about riding ATVs because alhamdulillah, here we're so blessed. We have a very large piece of land. We have a lot of neighbors around us. Here, MIC property is about 55 acres, right? And we've seen people come actually here sometimes, though it's not, it's against our policy. It's not allowed to come here, but we've seen people operate these vehicles. It's a lot of fun to ride these, toys, but they can be dangerous or they can potentially be deadly.
Yes.
So talk to us about that.
ATVs are incredibly dangerous vehicles, inherently. I can't overstate that enough.
They're not designed to be safe.
They're
Like
really
complete.
not.
Okay.
They're really not. They can be used with enjoyment safely, but they inherently have a lot of design. Their design makes them very prone to be dangerous for the riders.
Okay. And that's why they're not allowed on the street.
So in the state of Tennessee, it's allowed to ride ATVs.
Okay.
However, even though the name implies that it is safe on all terrains, they are in fact not. For instance, the tires of an ATV don't capture a main road, the terrain on the main road very well. Certainly not on gravel.
Okay.
If an ATV is being used in a field and there's an irregularity in the field that's not noticed by the driver, such as a big rock or a big hole,
or a dip or something, yeah. Okay.
and large aerated tires make an ATV very bouncy. An ATV can flip.
Okay.
In fact, some of the worst injuries that I've seen in the ICU, acknowledging that that's part of what I do, have come from ATV accidents.
So, and this is primarily either young adults or teenagers usually.
It can even be younger children.
Okay.
Now, in the state of Tennessee, the state of Tennessee has laws that say no child under the age of 16 without a driver's license is allowed to drive an ATV.
Okay.
But in the state of Tennessee, it's very prevalent.
Okay.
The state of Tennessee, in fact, also has amongst the greatest number of deaths from ATV accidents in the country.
Let me just repeat that again.
Yeah.
Dr. Nadeem has just told us that the state of Tennessee statistically has the largest,
not the largest, but among the largest.
amongst the largest,
Yeah.
when it comes to ATV-related deaths
That's right.
amongst
children.
in children.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there are certain things that folks can do. I think, you know, people are going to ride ATV, children and young adults are going to ride ATVs. So it's also worth knowing what they can do to protect themselves if they're going to do so.
I hope this doesn't trigger anyone, but really, because you're talking about something that is a lot of fun. You know what I mean? It's just so tempting. I mean, when I see it, I'm like, you know, and I've done it before, you know, a long time ago, and I don't mind doing it. But the question really is, and again, I don't mean for this to trigger anyone, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give anyone who has suffered any injury from that full recovery emotionally, psychologically, and physically. And may Allah have mercy on anyone that may have, you know, passed away due to ATV, related issues or accidents. The question is, someone might say, well, what's the worst that could happen? Oh, just I fall off the vehicle. I mean, can you just give us an idea of what may actually happen, what kind of injury it can be, it can cause? Because you don't have to have a collision, right? It does not have to be
Not at all.
two vehicles hitting each other. The ATV itself, in and of itself, you know, something could go wrong with it, and then what may happen? What's the potential?
Right.
Yeah.
So the most commonly the injuries that we see in children while riding ATVs occur because the ATV flips and lands on the child. Most often that the injury is not limited to one part of the body. The most dreaded part of the body to be injured is, of course, the brain, and we see often brain injuries that result. And for our community, it's important to recognize that's not a trivial matter, because a brain injury in a child can really change for the rest of their lives who that child is and is going to be. But beyond that, an ATV landing on the body of a child can result in contusions or bruising of the lungs, can result in fractures of the liver and spleen, fractures of the pelvis, fractures of the extremities. And when multiple organs like that begin to get injured, those children are at high risk of deteriorating into severe critical illness in our ICUs. In fact, we see it all too often. The issue is one that is of such grave importance that the American Academy of Pediatrics has in fact issued a statement, which is a statement, which is unusual for them, that says they recommend against any child under the age of 16 riding ATVs altogether. But if children are going to do so, it is important to keep in mind a few things. One, always ride single passenger, not dual passenger. Number two, the type of helmet that should be worn on an ATV should be more akin to a motorcycle helmet, which covers the full head, rather than a bicycle helmet.
Right. Okay.
Although the types of injuries that we see most often occur in children who aren't wearing helmets at all. And then a four-wheel ATV is just a little bit safer than a three-wheel ATV, but they make ATVs now that have crossbars and so forth and engine covers, and those can provide, and seat belts,
Okay.
those can provide a little bit more safety.
Okay.
Although those aren't entirely safe either.
Now, I think I'm not gonna allow my children to ride them. No, seriously. I mean, especially that if you really want to have fun, you have to go high speed, and you have to make some very dangerous maneuvers, and it's not worth it if it's gonna lead to injury. If it's gonna injure the person operating it, or if they're gonna lose control. Let's just say, because we're running out of time. I guess if they're that dangerous, why are they allowed?
A lot of folks derive enjoyment from riding them, and in a country that values freedom and personal enjoyment, I think it's an entity that that's here. That's a part of our culture. It's particularly part of our culture in the South. And I don't mean to suggest that for the right aged rider in the right environment, they can't be used unsafely. there is just a lot of risk. One could say that about motorcycles as well, but people ride motorcycles.
Because this is, if you don't mind me asking,
not at all. Yeah.
this is what gets to me. Okay, we don't allow our children to operate cars, regular auto, regular vehicles. We don't allow them without proper training and without a license. At least we're not supposed to. Though I still see families, and word to these families, please do not do that. And the masjid parking lot is not the place where you are supposed to allow your underage children or children who don't have driver's license to drive. You're not allowed to do that. MIC does not condone that, and there's no place for that. But you don't allow them to drive vehicles, right? Yet we think that these are just big, huge toys that are safe. A lot of parents don't realize that they are even more dangerous than a regular car, right?
Certainly, by far.
Okay.
And you raise a very good point, because there are, in fact, training courses for riding ATVs. And so if your child is of age and is going to be riding an ATV, I strongly suggest that you put them through a course so that they can become familiar with the types of things that can go on and the types of behaviors that they can exercise to maintain control of an ATV and the different scenarios that can emerge.
Okay. Can we quickly, before we conclude, inshallah, touch upon gun safety? Because again,
Sure.
the fact of the matter is that I no longer live in California. I'm living here in the South, and people own firearms.
Right.
So, and you mentioned it as a potential serious source of danger.
Yeah.
What word of advice do you have?
Yeah. First, it's important, I think, for folks to know, in our setting, all too often, we see children who are injured by guns that they have access to, as well as adults who might be even injured by a child, although we don't see those adults. There are a few very basic things that can be done to enhance the safety of a household that has a gun. Number one, keep the gun in a locked environment. Number two, store the gun in a locked environment, unloaded. Number three, keep the ammunition in a locked environment. Number four, store the ammunition in a locked environment in a place that is different from where the gun is. Now, those people who keep a handgun for personal safety in the home are going to say, well, that doesn't help me very much.
Exactly. Yeah.
The personal safety that you may derive from having a loaded gun in a nightstand really needs to be balanced with the risk that introduces to the children that are in the home. And one might say, that the children are in the home all the time. It is very unlikely for an intruder to come into the home in a scenario in which that gun may be used. And so that's just that's a personal choice that people have to make, a personal balance that they have to strike. But those practices are ones that have been shown to reduce injuries to children.
How about recommending that if you have children who are very curious, who not to have it at all? I mean, wouldn't that be the safest thing, not to have it? Because what I'm trying to say, if people are not willing to really pay attention to, to gun safety, right? And they're really particular about it, and then maybe they're better off not having it, because how often or how likely is it that the gun is misused?
Yeah, so I don't know the statistics behind what the likelihood is for a child to use a gun if it's in the home.
Okay.
But what I do know is that it is far more likely for a child or someone in the home to be injured by a loaded gun than it is for that gun to be used in a scenario of self-protection.
Okay.
And so that those as
know-
we've said,
we know
children
that
are
for
very curious.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to keep in mind for older children
So
is
you're saying that it's less likely that that gun is going to come in handy for what it's intended for. There are higher chances for that gun to actually cause serious injury or death, wal'iyadhu billah, to someone that you really care about
in the home.
in the home.
And then with respect to older children in the home as well, we live in a time in which mental illness is prevalent. Children, like adults, have depression. Children, and those children, if they have access to guns, in fact, the individual shooting event deaths we don't hear very much about. In children and teens, many of those are because of suicide. And many of those gun-related suicides are simply because the child had access to the gun.
Jazakallah khair. We're out of time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you for joining us. Thank you, dear brothers and sisters, everyone who's present here, families that are watching us online, and those who will be watching this particular segment. Inshallah ta'ala, I hope you benefited from the information that we shared. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you and your loved ones. May Allah keep all of our community members and particularly our children safe. May you all have a joyous and safe summer. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.